My great-grandmother, Sophie Zunie, is easily the most important person in my life. She's seen 118 years and has been through so much in her long life. She was born in Russia, in Moscow actually, in 1904. She was a member of the Russian ballet until she left for America in 1924. She danced and taught ballet once she established herself in America, and now she supports the arts in her old age and helps instructors in getting the most from their dancers. I've been living here since I was 16, my parents having died in a car crash. During that time, I've heard many stories about her life in the New York Ballet, the Chicago Ballet, and her adventures as her troupe toured the New World that was such an enrapturing thing for a young girl fresh from the harsh Russian landscape. Of Russia, though, she would say nothing. She wouldn't talk about her first 20 years of life. It was as if she couldn't bring herself to relive that part of her. No matter how I prodded, she refused to tell me anything. At least, until last night. I woke up around midnight, my bladder bursting. On my way back to bed, I noticed that great-grandmother was sitting in the living room. She had a roaring fire built in the grate, something I was curious about since all the wood was in the backyard, and she was sitting close enough that I was afraid she might go up in flames. I ran in, reaching for the water bucket, but her wrinkled old hand reached out to stop me. "Don't. I like the flames. They remind me of my girlhood." I sat down with her, afraid she might fall in, as she sat and stared at the dancing fire. "They dance as I used to when I was a little girl." I was quiet for a moment, her voice spidery and thin. When you were in Russia?" I finally asked. She nodded. "I studied under Madame Jeunesse Grutiev, one of Russia's finest instructors. She claimed to have performed for the Romanovs in their day, though she never said which Romanovs. She was old when I met her, but she molded my young body into the dancer I am today. Madame Grutiev was responsible for training many great dancers, most going on to dance for the Moscow Ballet. But she was old. People wanted younger dancers to teach their children, teachers who could still demonstrate the techniques without falling on their palsied pec-sides. My mother was no fool, though. She had been trained by Madame Grutiev and wanted her daughter to receive the same training. I went on to dance for her troupe for 16 years, eventually becoming a teacher in her studio. They called me Lady Zunie when I took the stage. I was the darling of the ballet in my season, and my star seemed on the rise. She paused then, her eyes drinking in the flames as she stared it down, until the fire. She began to tell me her story, and as I watched the flames dancing in her glassy eyes, it seemed like I could see the movie of her life playing out just for me. The studio had a legacy of excellence, but that brought us very little money. Madame Grutiev owed money to some very bad people, people who didn't like unsettled debts. They had offered trades for more time, wanting her girls for the usual things that brutes want a young girl for, but Madame Grutiev protected us from them. But these were not the sort of men to be balked. They blocked us from getting work, and Madame Grutiev was getting desperate. She was still making money from the lessons she taught, but her students were also becoming less and less. Some of it was the men she owed money to, but some of it was her age. Parents appreciated a teacher who could demonstrate their craft, and Madame Grutiev was old. Her legs were gouty and unsteady, and her gait was even then not so good. My friend Louise and I did most of the teaching, but we were losing girls to other troupes. With these men blocking us from getting work, we had little money to pay the rent on the studio, let alone her debt. But life offers opportunities sometimes, cruel as they may be. Madame Grutiev received an invitation one day. An invitation to take part in Vladimir Stropokov's latest ballet. Stropokov was a genius in Moscow, though his performances were often as experimental as they were outrageous. I remember hearing that one such show had been held in the forest by night, all the dancers performing naked in the snow. Many of them had suffered hypothermia. A few of them had even gotten some frostbite. Still, the show had been heavily attended, and the profits were said to be substantial. Madame Grutiev said that the price he had offered her for 3 dancers would likely pay off her debt, and then some, and Stropikov had asked for Lady Zunie specifically. I've never heard of the performance, but it's highly anticipated and could only raise your star higher. She chose Louise and Georgette to accompany me, her 3 best dancers. We were excited to be in one of Stropikov's shows. They were often odd and sometimes dangerous, but many of those chosen to perform went on to have great success in the Moscow Ballet and beyond. Rehearsals were scheduled for the week to come, and we practiced in our free time so that we wouldn't disappoint Madame Grutiev. We arrived early at the designated practice space, only to find that it was being held at Vladimir Stropikov's estate. We were shown into a large receiving room to wait, several of the girls already present. We spoke with them for a time, the other girls arriving as the appointed time grew closer. Finally, Mr. Stropikov arrived to speak with us personally, and the room grew instantly still. He was dressed in a luxurious dinner coat, a soft pair of pinstripe pants adorning his thick legs, and he looked like a sultan in a children's play. His caliph-like slippers were pointed, elvish in their design and softness, and he seemed to exude charm and affluence.
I am glad that so many of you have come to join my little production. I have called 30 of you here, but will only retain 15. 15 of the best will take part in my production of Moths Aflame. I look forward to seeing what all of you bring to the table, especially the enchanting Lady Zunie.
He winked at me then, seemed to pick me from the crowd, and I felt honored to be noticed by someone so affluent. What a little fool I was. The following 2 weeks encompassed the most demanding audition of my life. Stropikov put us through our paces from dawn till dusk, sometimes making us dance and rehearse for hours on end. He cut 5 in the first hour, 2 others before the day was over. He made us dance naked on the first day, watching us as our bodies moved and making notes of where we could improve. After the 3rd day, we were allowed to wear our leotards, and he made us run through the woods like deer on a hunt. He cut those who didn't run gracefully enough, another 4 girls, and as we bent double, gasping for air in his backyard, he smiled wolfishly.
You do not disappoint, dear Lady Zunie. I knew you would be the one to give my performance fire.
It took 4 more days of grueling drills to ferret out the last 4, and Georgette wept as she was sent away on the last day of trials. After that, the true work began. We were fitted for costumes, the fabric gauzy, and the material slightly oily. It sat against the skin like mud. It made my flesh crawl. It felt greasy, and Louise told me that it made her break out in a rash. As we began to dance in them, I could feel the way it grated against me. It made me think of sandpaper, or maybe burlap, but it was always soft to the touch when I removed it. It makes sense now, but by the time I figured it out, it was far too late. We practiced and rehearsed for the next month, Stropikov's critical eye always upon us. When the night of the show arrived, we were all aflutter with anticipation. We peeked through the curtains as they filed in, women in furs and men in suits. All of them wore mysterious lacquered masks, and they looked ghastly as they leered at the stage. They sat like ghosts amidst the low light, watching with anticipation. In our costumes, we resembled moths. In my stomach, it felt like a swarm was swirling in an anxious cloud. I felt like it was my first time on stage again, and I had to remind myself that this was no different than any other performance. When Stropikov called to us, we gathered for final instruction.
Good luck tonight, my beauties. Tonight's show promises to be the highlight of the season. I am certain that all of your stars will shine brightly this evening.
He smiled hugely, a secret joke that only he understood. Then the curtain came up, and 15 pallid moths began to mount the stage. The stage was circular, rimmed with oil lamps that burned low in their holders. Above us, something hung like a grand chandelier, and as we took our positions, I saw it slowly descend over the top of us. One of the girls, I cannot remember her name, gasped and started to shake as the great something seemed ready to smash us flat. She tried to bolt, but Stropikov's voice cracked like a whip, freezing her in mid-flight.
Do not move a muscle. You will not ruin my vision, little moth. Not tonight.
She squeaked, seeming to be on the verge of tears, and I looked over to see Stropikov with a small, gleaming pistol in his hand. As the shadowy mass descended from the ceiling, I saw what it was an instant before it encircled us. It was a glass chimney, like the ones on top of a lantern. The runner, Ingrid, her name was Ingrid, looked enchanted as the milky glass hemmed her in. Her terror had turned to rapture as she looked at the glass prison that now encased us. She stepped shyly towards it, hands outstretched, and when the music started, she missed her cue. The rest of us began to dance, 14 moths in hectic flight. We had been trained to stay within the confines of the stage. A silver circle had been built into the stage just inside the ring of lamps, and it acted as our perimeter. We'd been instructed not to cross that silver ring, but Ingrid was prepared to do just that. It wasn't really her fault. Ingrid was 15, too young to be involved with something like this. She was tough, though. I suppose she had to be to make it this far. She was young, though, and her youth meant that she was still prone to fancy. As we danced, I heard many of them hiss for her to get back into position. We had taken wing, dancing and flapping as we gyrated around our glass prison. As I danced, I saw the eyes of the crowd find us, find me, their lady Zunie. Stropikov had placed me in the middle of the swarm, giving me a position of prominence. My costume had an eye pattern on the wings, a long flowing stripe that crested the tips, and I stood out amongst my plain white counterparts. As I danced, for the sea of lacquered masks, I could almost imagine them transformed into the rich and affluent men and women of high society that would grace the seats of the Moscow theater, or even the Grand Russian ballroom. I was alone on that stage, dancing my heart out, and the crowd would applaud and cheer and shower me with their praise. I would perform for kings, for lords, just like Madame Grutiev had, and the whole world would know that my star shone above all others. I didn't see when Ingrid stepped too close to the oil lamps, her small hand reaching out to touch the delicate glass. I did not see when her leg set afire as it came in contact with the flame. I saw her when she burst into flames, going up like a real moth when it has kissed the fire within the lamp. Her screams echoed off the glass walls, and the pandemonium erupted soon after. Ingrid ran towards the others, her high angelic voice slipping across our senses like a razor. She ran towards the closest dancer, arms open as she begged to be saved or killed, or whatever hope she'd hoped to find there. As they touched, the girl's face an O of surprise. Her costume erupted in flames, and she fell into another. That one lit as well. The two beside her went next, then the two beside her, and so on, and so on. From the center of the dancers, I was trapped in a glowing pyre of flames and screams. It was chaos, girls running and beating at the glass, some still twirling and dancing drunkenly as they burned. I expected the glass to rise. I expected the crowd to come to our aid, but as I watched, I knew this was what they had been waiting for. They were all on their feet now, clapping and cheering as though this were the finest performance they'd ever seen. Stropikov came from backstage, and the applause reached a fever pitch as he raised his hands magnanimously.
Thank you, thank you. Any sacrifice for the sake of art. Any sacrifice for the sake of art!
They were on their feet, their cheers and applause inaudible from inside the dome. They cheered as we died, and I felt certain that this would be the end of me. As the smoke and stench surrounded me, I saw someone in their midst who did not belong. He was tall, taller than a man had any right to be, draped in a ratty black suit and gloves that hung in rags from his 2 thin fingers. It seemed like I could hear his clapping above the others, the only one I could hear clearly, and as his hands came together one last climactic time, he lifted one of them to his mask. It was different from the others, a grinning fool done in red and black, and as it came away, I saw an equally happy skull beneath. The black eye sockets seemed to wink at me, and the bright white skull grinned merrily. As I lost consciousness amid that hell of running bodies, his was the last thing that I saw. When I awoke, I was laying in the street behind the theater. My clothes had been badly burned. My hair was gone, burned away in the flames, but I was untouched and unhurt so far as I could tell. Several of Stropikov's assistants were moving the bodies from the theater, putting them in the alley behind, and the blackened corpses made me realize how lucky I had been. I was the only survivor of Stropikov's moths aflame. He was never convicted of the 14 girls he burned alive. I know that Madame Grutiev was paid handsomely for her dancers, and I can only assume that the other studios who put forth girls were equally compensated. Before you say that this could not be, that no one would possibly fail to notice 14 missing girls in a city like Moscow, you should remember that this was Russia in the early 20s. World War I had only ended a few years ago, and people disappeared every day. Disappearances were still something not wholly uncommon there. Russia was a hard place to live, even in places like Moscow. People left for better things. People died in strange and horrifying ways. I certainly left when all of this was over. It was not so uncommon to find bodies in the canals and back alleys. I went to Madame Grutiev's studio. When she saw me, she wept. I had no idea he would do such a thing. How was I to know what a monster he was? She gave me the money I had made from the performance, the money that would get her out of debt, and told me to flee. Stropikov has powerful friends, friends who make the ones I owe money to look like minnows to a whale. Take this money, take the money that Louise died for, and build a new life somewhere where things like this do not happen. What about you? I asked her, but she only smiled. I'm going somewhere beyond them. She killed herself later that night, drank poison in her office or some such thing. Georgette found her the next day, but I was on my way elsewhere by then. She found me years later and wrote to tell me these things. She mourned us, those dead and those gone, and told me she still ran the studio where Madame had always loved to be. Stropikov continued to produce shows until 1955. A group of men came to get him after one of his performances killed 8 girls and burned a field of wheat to cinder. I think they were probably madder about the wheat than the girls, but they hung him from a nearby tree in the field, and it was too quick for the likes of him, if you ask me. I never danced under Madame Zunie again. She died in Moscow, in the fire that killed so many. We sat there in the ensuing silence, the crackling fire, the only sound other than the shallow respirations of me and my great-grandmother. Did you ever see him again? No, she said, but I never forgot that grinning apparition or the clear regard he had for me. I attribute my long life to that night. I stood before death, and he tipped his head to me. When I see him again, I want him to see that I was worthy of his regard. The two of us sat looking at the fire for quite some time, my sleep forgotten, as I watched the cinders dance, becoming ghost moths before my very eyes. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's performance. I'd like to give a very special thanks to a very old friend of the show, Baron Landred, who runs Tales by the Baron, who I'll link below if you'd like to go check out some of his work. He's very talented, and his voice work is second to none. I hope you enjoyed his portrayal of Stropikov tonight as much as I did. Another special thanks is to the Lore Podcast, which gave me the idea for this story. If you're not familiar with Aaron Mahnke and the work that he does over at the Lore Podcast, or Aaron Mahnke's Curiosity Cabinet, then I suggest you go have a look. His work it's very good, and it gives me a lot of ideas for stories sometimes. But before we sign off, let's go ahead and thank our sponsors. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronana for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributor. And thanks to Glen Jenkins for being our Ghostwriter tier contributor. Thanks, guys. You are truly the flames beneath the wings of this particular moth. If you'd like to support the show, come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you too can have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video. You can also get your videos a day early on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and support the show. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.